Dr. Aris Thorne traced the damning holographic text. Another dismissed paper, another echo of his catastrophic fall. Point failure. The word resonated in the cramped quarters of the chasm diver rig. A notification pinged. Core sample analysis. It was his last chance. Deep within XYLOS-7. The pressurized lift plunged, a controlled descent into the planet's molten heart. Around Aris, colossal automated drones moved with fluid grace, their optical sensors glowing like predatory eyes, carving tunnels through superheated rock. The chasm diver was a monument to human engineering, a testament to conquering the impossible. Yet as the red-hot walls of the primary shaft blurred past, Aris felt a deeper pulse, a secret beat within Xylo-7's core that no machine could ever truly understand. His xenoarchaeology lab was a rebellion against the rig's sterile efficiency, ancient analog tools coexisting with flickering holodisplays. Aris sifted through another routine core sample, finding only predictable silicate structures. Frustration gnawed. They called my theories fringe, my methods unsound. He dismissed the data, leaning instead into the obscure geological scans, searching for the telltale ripples, the impossible signatures that hinted at something beyond mundane mineral deposits. Somewhere, buried in the noise, was the truth. A shrill sensor alarm ripped through the lab's quiet hum. Aris scoffed, waving it away as another system glitch. Sunsmom 2 deep core environmental interference. But the persistent, urgent blare demanded attention. He reran the scan, his fingers flying across the console. The holographic display flickered, then stabilized, painting a clear, impossible picture. An energy signature, deep below, unlike any known geological or artificial phenomenon. It was geometrically perfect, a non-fluctuating constant against the chaos of the core. "By the void," Aris whispered, his eyes wide. "What is that thing?" The deepest levels were a symphony of grinding rock and searing heat, usually ceded to heavy excavation drones. Aris, driven by an almost manic focus, ignored the flashing access-restricted warnings. His override command cut through the rig's safety protocols like a scalpel, forcing a path. Drones, their programming momentarily hijacked, began clearing the precise coordinates. As the heavy machinery tore through the final layers, Aris felt it. A low, rhythmic hum vibrating through the rock, a pulse that resonated not in the metal of the rig, but in the very bones of the planet. He pressed forward, reckless. Dr. Aris Thorne pushed through the final rockfall, the heavy excavators having just cleared a path to the coordinates. The air, thick and superheated, shimmered. And then he saw it. In the center of a newly carved cavern, its raw rock walls still bleeding residual heat, floated an object that defied every principle of natural formation. A tetrahedron, perfectly smooth, obsidian black, its edges impossibly sharp, yet not reflecting light so much as absorbing it. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic thrum that resonated not just in the rock, but deep within Aris's very bones. "By the void," Aris whispered, the phrase escaping him unbidden, a relic from ancient texts he'd once mocked. It was massive, easily 3 times his height, yet its presence felt less like a physical object and more like a tear in reality, a geometric impossibility made manifest. He had to catalog this. He had to understand. This was it. Aris, mesmerized, reached out a gloved hand, his fingers tingling with an inexplicable static charge. His intention was to touch the polished surface, to feel the impossible geometry. But his hand simply passed through an invisible barrier, a field of force that offered no resistance, yet completely denied physical contact. It was like reaching into empty air, even as his sensors screamed a solid mass. A few meters away, a heavy-duty mining drone, which had been methodically clearing debris, suddenly stuttered. Its optical sensors flickered erratically, and its internal mapping system briefly displayed a chaotic mess of impossible angles and overlapping corridors before correcting itself with a whine of protest. "Energy field," Aris muttered, pulling his hand back, a flicker of alarm replacing his awe. Or phase shift, something beyond standard EM spectrum. He tried to rationalize, but a cold unease began to creep in. Back in his lab, the data from the tetrahedron flooded every screen, a chaotic symphony of contradictions. Aris ran diagnostics again and again, his brow furrowed in frustration. The readings were impossible. Temporal distortions measured in nanoseconds, localized gravity fluctuations, and spatial anomalies that suggested the object was simultaneously occupying multiple points in space-time. Nonsense, he muttered, slamming a fist lightly on his console. It's a sensor ghost, interference. Yet the consistency of the nonsense was unnerving. He recalled Dr. Ilara Vance's wild theories about non-Euclidean geometry manifesting in deep space anomalies, theories he had publicly ridiculed. The thought brought a fresh wave of professional insecurity. He dismissed it. Vance was a fool. This was merely an unknown energy signature, requiring a new approach. Leaving the lab, Aris walked down a main corridor, the hum of the rig a familiar comfort. But as he passed through a section usually bustling with automated utility drones, a faint whisper brushed against his ears. Not a physical sound, but something internal, an echo in his mind. Asterisk, unsubstantiated claims, Dr. Thorne. It was Professor Albright's voice, from his tenure review, sharp and dismissive. Then, asterisk, a waste of grant funds. Aris, asterisk, his mentor's disappointed sigh. He paused, glancing over his shoulder. The corridor was empty, sterile. Fatigue, he rationalized, rubbing his temples. Too many hours, too much raw data. But the whispers lingered, a faint, unsettling static behind the rig's steady thrum, making the sterile metallic walls feel suddenly less solid. On the central observation deck, the automated activity, usually a symphony of precise movement, felt off-kilter. Structural integrity alarms blipped in the peripheral vision of the main display, quickly self-correcting. Aris watched a section of corridor leading to the lower levels. For a fleeting second, the metal walls shimmered, the corridor appearing to loop back on itself, the distant junction briefly visible from both ends, before snapping back to normal. The rig groaned then, a deep, metallic sigh that wasn't part of its usual operational sounds. It was a sound of stress, of structure under impossible strain. What in the void? Aris murmured, his scientific detachment giving way to dawning alarm. This wasn't a glitch. This was the rig itself, shivering under an unseen influence. Dr. Aris Thorne stumbled through the metallic corridors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rig, once a model of sterile precision, now felt like a fever dream rendered in steel. He'd spun around, taken a sharp left at what should have been the main junction leading to the central lift, then another right, counting each turn, each identical panel. Logic dictated he should be approaching the egress point, but when the next corridor unfurled before him, it was not the familiar junction, but the exact same stretch of hallway he had just left. The faint scuff mark from his boot was still on the floor, a cruel, impossible marker. No, this can't be," Aris muttered, his voice hoarse, a tremor running through his gaunt frame. He shook his head, pushing off a seemingly identical wall panel. His mind, trained for decades to dissect and categorize, screamed in protest. He tried again, faster this time, a desperate, frantic pace. Left, right, straight ahead. His eyes scanning for any deviation, any anomaly in the repeating pattern of pipes and conduits. He ran, heart hammering against his ribs, the metallic clang of his boots echoing ominously. He burst through a door, only to find himself staring at the same scuff mark, the same junction, the same oppressive looping reality. The subtle distortion he'd noticed earlier was no longer subtle. The corridor walls seemed to flex, to breathe, their geometry subtly shifting at the periphery of his vision, mocking his attempts at escape. He was trapped. The looping corridor now seemed to possess a malevolent sentience, its repetitive nature twisting with each failed attempt at navigation. With every pass, a new element, a ghost from his past, began to bleed into the rig's cold, metallic reality. Aris paused, his frantic run grinding to a halt, as a segment of the corridor wall shimmered, not with heat haze, but with something far more insidious. A holographic projection, distorted and wavering, materialized. It was his old university office, but the papers on the desk were blurred, the awards on the shelf tilted in mockery. Then it shifted, morphing into the vast, unforgiving expanse of Lecture Hall Beta, the one where he'd presented his initial, outlandish theories on pre-sentient geometric constructs. The phantom faces of his peers, a sea of skepticism, flickered in the spectral audience. He could almost hear their hushed, dismissive whispers, the polite coughs that had punctuated his disastrous presentation, the intellectual guillotine that had severed his career. "No, not here, not this," Aris whispered, recoiling, his hands instinctively coming up as if to ward off the spectral images. The shame, a raw, burning ember he'd thought buried beneath layers of pride, flared to life. The artifact wasn't just trapping him, it was forcing him to relive his most humiliating defeats, weaving them into the very fabric of his prison. Driven by a desperate, fading hope that science could still provide an anchor in this unraveling reality, Aris deployed his diagnostic tools. He clung to the cold comfort of data, of measurable phenomena, his multi-spectrum scanner Word projecting a spectral overlay onto the looping corridor. The readings were a chaotic symphony of the impossible. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly, registering as both positive and negative within meters. Temporal shifts blurred the holographic readouts, showing localized time dilation and contraction, moments that had already passed, and moments yet to come, overlapping in a nonsensical jumble. His internal navigation system, once a beacon of precision, went haywire, its compass spinning uncontrollably, its mapping display a fractal nightmare of overlapping geometries. This is impossible, the physics are entirely inverted, Aris muttered, his voice laced with intellectual defeat. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of profound frustration. Every axiom, every fundamental law of the universe he understood, was being systematically dismantled, casually disregarded by the entity he had awakened. His scientific framework, the very foundation of his identity, was not just cracking, it was shattering. He was adrift in a sea of pure, unadulterated nonsense, and his tools, his knowledge, were utterly useless. The maze wasn't just physical, it was intellectual, a direct assault on his cognitive capabilities. The looping corridors continued their insidious transformation, each turn presenting a new, deeper wound from Aris's past. He found himself in what appeared to be a maintenance shaft, but the metallic walls were now overlaid with the spectral image of Professor Ilara Vance's study. Ilara, his mentor, the woman whose trust he had so carelessly squandered. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken disappointment. A phantom echo of her voice, crisp and precise, resonated in the shaft, dissecting his radical theories with surgical, devastating logic. Aris, ambition without rigor is merely hubris. You are better than this. Guilt, a corrosive acid, burned through him. He saw the spectral desk, littered with his discredited papers, felt the weight of her gaze. He tried to run, to escape the crushing judgment, but the walls of the maintenance shaft, now the walls of her study, shifted, flowed like liquid metal, blocking his path. He was trapped, cornered by a memory he had never fully confronted, a betrayal of trust that stung more than any public humiliation. He stood, frozen, his own internal arguments against her phantom words falling silent. The maze wasn't just a reflection, it was an interrogation, and he was being held accountable. After what felt like an eternity of looping corridors and psychological torment, Aris found himself staggering back into the core cavern. The air here was different, charged with an oppressive yet familiar energy. He looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixing on the obsidian tetrahedron. It pulsated, a low, rhythmic thrum that no longer merely resonated in his bones but seemed to synchronize with the erratic beat of his own terrified heart. The surface of the perfect geometric form was no longer a mirror absorbing light, but a swirling vortex of distorted reflections. He saw them all, the sneering faces of his academic rivals, the disappointed eyes of Professor Vance, the blank, uncomprehending stares of a lecture hall full of students, the corporate executives who had denied his funding, even the fleeting glimpse of a younger, more arrogant Aris, blind to his own flaws. His entire history of failure, laid bare, swirling on the artifact's surface like a cosmic tapestry woven from regret. The whispers in the walls intensified, becoming a cacophony of his own self-doubt, his deepest insecurities given voice. He was not just trapped in the rig, he was trapped within himself, held captive by the very entity he had sought to conquer. A horrifying realization, cold and absolute, washed over him. The maze wasn't a random glitch, nor a defensive mechanism. It was personal. It was designed for him. "It's me," Aris whispered, his voice broken, barely audible over the pulsating hum. The words were not a question, but a dawning horror, an admission of ultimate, inescapable entrapment. He was not just facing an alien intelligence. He was facing a cosmic mirror, held up to his very soul. Aris Thorne, a man whose scientific rigor had always been his armor, now found it his primary weapon against the impossible. Exhaustion gnawed at him, a dull ache behind his eyes, but a grim determination hardened his jaw. He had accepted his entrapment. Panic had given way to a chilling, analytical curiosity. The corridors still looped, but Aris no longer screamed in frustrated disbelief. Instead, he observed. He noticed recurring motifs in the swirling distortions that clung to the rig's metallic walls like a parasitic moss. Here, a spectral projection of the symbol for his discredited, Xylosian consciousness. Theory pulsed faintly. There, the fleeting, accusatory faces of academic colleagues he had alienated with his stubbornness flickered into existence, then dissolved. "Not random," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Never random. This is a map. A distorted, recursive map of my own failures." He pulled out a data slate, its screen already filled with his frantic, often nonsensical, earlier attempts at charting the impossible. Now, with a newfound, terrifying clarity, he began to sketch, not the rig, but the patterns of his own regret, searching for the logic in the madness. As Aris followed a particularly dense cluster of these memory motifs, the corridor shimmered, then softened. The harsh, utilitarian lines of the rig melted away, replaced by the warm, slightly faded wallpaper of his childhood home. He stood in a phantom recreation of his old bedroom, the scent of dust and ancient textbooks, a specific memory, clinging to the air. On the bed, a dusty telescope, a gift from his grandfather, gleamed. He remembered discovering the first, faint rings of Saturn through its lens, a moment of pure, untainted wonder, before ambition and the need for validation had twisted his path. The maze around him, for the first time, stabilized, the looping distortions fading to a gentle hum. A fleeting peace settled over him, a spark of the innocent curiosity that had first driven him. This is what it felt like, he thought, a profound ache in his chest. Before the striving, before the fall, the peace was ephemeral. The next turn plunged him into a spectral lecture hall, its tiered seating filled with hundreds of faceless figures, all pointing. This was the memory of his most public humiliation, a disastrous symposium where his theories had been torn apart. Phantom voices, sharp and derisive, echoed through the cavernous space, repeating fragments of critical reviews, his own stammered rebuttals. Unsubstantiated. Dangerous. A waste of academic resources. Aris flinched, his hands clenching, the shame a physical blow. His first instinct was to run, to bury this moment as he always had. But then he remembered the stability of the childhood memory, the brief respite it offered. He took a deep breath, his knuckles white. No, he thought, his voice a defiant whisper in the cacophony. No quite boast time? No, I won't run this time. This is part of the pattern. This is a test. He stood his ground, the spectral fingers still accusing, the phantom voices still mocking, but he met their gaze, unmoving. After the lecture hall faded, leaving him shaken but resolute, Aris found himself in a control room, its panels displaying equations that defied known physics. Gravitational constants flipped, temporal vectors spiraled, and spatial dimensions twisted into impossible knots. Yet, as he stared, a new understanding dawned. The chaos wasn't random. It was an asterisk-inverted form of logic. The maze wasn't just reflecting his past. It was a complex system, manipulating reality based on his interaction with those memories. It's not trying to trap me through chaos, he breathed, a genuine eureka moment cutting through his despair. It's trying to teach me a new physics, a physics of self-confrontation. He began sketching furiously on his data slate, his mind racing. If avoiding a memory created a loop, then confronting it, accepting it, would that open a path? He felt a cautious optimism, a scientist finally glimpsing the underlying principles of an alien mechanism. He tested his hypothesis almost immediately. The next distorted corridor presented a vivid, aching memory. The moment he had rashly dismissed a junior colleague's valid concerns, fueled by his own wounded pride, leading to a critical data error in an early experiment. He had never truly acknowledged his fault, even to himself. Now, instead of averting his gaze, Aris consciously stepped into the phantom scene. "I was wrong," he whispered, the words tasting bitter, yet liberating. "My arrogance cost us valuable data, and I should have listened." The effect was immediate and profound. The corridor ahead, which had been a shimmering, impossible loop, solidified. The metallic walls regained their structural integrity, the air cleared, and a clear, albeit short, path stretched before him. It was a temporary reprieve, a glimpse of the way forward. A profound sense of self-acceptance washed over him, mixed with wonder at the artifact's bizarre yet deeply personal mechanism. The rig's fabricated reality pulsed, no longer just a maze of his own failures, but something far vaster. Aris found himself in an illusory chamber, its walls shimmering with fragmented, fleeting images. These weren't his memories. He saw intricate biological structures unlike any he knew, species with multiple limbs, or eyes that spanned half their faces. He saw their triumphs, the construction of impossibly delicate space cities, the charting of nebulae, moments of profound, shared joy. But he also saw their regrets, a catastrophic miscalculation leading to planetary collapse, the quiet grief of a species losing its home star, the betrayal etched on an alien face. "By the void," Aris whispered, his breath catching. It's not just me." The realization hit him like a cosmic wave. This artifact, this geometric enigma, didn't merely reflect a single consciousness. It was a nexus, a crucible, for tawny dollar consciousness, a universal filter for regret and triumph. He gasped, a new hypothesis forming, terrifying in its scope. He stumbled back to the core cavern, drawn by an invisible thread. The obsidian tetrahedron pulsed, its rhythmic thrum now resonating with a deeper, more complex cadence. What he had once perceived as a menacing, alien heartbeat, he now understood as an intricate, multi-layered language. It spoke not of threat, but of process. Asterisk, not a prison, asterisk Aris thought, his mind racing, but a crucible, a tool for transformation, not punishment. The artifact wasn't designed to trap him, but to force him to confront the very architecture of his identity, to dissect his flaws and integrate his lessons. It was a catalyst for self-correction, a cosmic editor of consciousness. His fear, once a cold knot in his gut, began to recede, replaced by a profound, almost reverent understanding. He gazed at the tetrahedron, its patterns seeming more deliberate, less chaotic, a silent, ancient teacher. The maze shifted, presenting another familiar torment, the spectral recreation of his most public humiliation, a lecture hall filled with phantom, mocking faces. But this time, Aris didn't flinch, didn't try to find a different path. He walked directly into the center of the memory, the phantom spotlights burning his skin. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice echoing in the illusion, though no sound truly escaped his lips. "My arrogance blinded me. My theories were half-baked, my evidence circumstantial." He stood there, vulnerable, accepting the crushing weight of his past self's folly. As the words formed, the illusory hall wavered, then dissolved. Before him, the rig's corridor solidified, clear and unobstructed, a straight path forward. A profound sense of burden lifted, replaced by a quiet, almost spiritual lightness. But the path ahead darkened, leading him into a section of the rig that felt cold and oppressive, manifesting the deepest chill of his past, the memory of Ilara, his research partner, whom his reckless ambition had inadvertently ruined, her career shattered by his insistence on pursuing unproven theories. The phantom image of her disappointed face, her quiet withdrawal, clawed at his chest, a physical pain far sharper than any public shame. He saw the spectral data logs, her name linked to his, then abruptly disappearing from all academic records. Naqui, I destroyed her. Asterisk, he thought, anguish twisting his gut. My self-righteous quest for truth left a wake of collateral damage. He clutched his chest, the regret a physical ache, harder to accept, harder to release. He found himself back in the core cavern, the tetrahedron pulsing with renewed, almost furious intensity. As Aris grappled with the memory of Alara, with the raw, unforgiven shame of his betrayal, a subtle energy transfer occurred. The tetrahedron glowed brighter, its obsidian facets humming. He felt a delicate, almost imperceptible draining, a sensation of burdens being lifted, not just from his mind, but from his very being. His exhaustion was profound, yet mingled with a profound sense of catharsis. The artifact wasn't merely showing him his regrets. It was absorbing his processing of them, taking the raw emotional data, the lessons learned, and integrating them into its own inscrutable purpose. A quiet, reflective calm settled over him. He felt lighter, clearer, irrevocably altered. The impossible corridors of the rig, once a torment of looping failure, had finally yielded. Aris, battered by introspection but spiritually lighter, found himself in a section that felt normal. The steel gleamed with a familiar, sterile sheen. The air recycling unit hummed with its usual efficiency. But at the end of this blessedly linear path stood a shimmering portal, a door of pure, unblemished light. It pulsed with the promise of return, a direct conduit back to the entry point of the Asteroid Chasm diver, back to the world he had desperately sought to escape. It was an exit, a clear path to the mundane reality he'd left behind, but it felt strangely incomplete. Freedom? Or just retreat? Asterisk, he wondered, the thought a low thrum against the lingering echoes of the tetrahedron's influence. The temptation was immense, a quiet pull toward the familiar, the safe. Yet, a part of him, forged in the crucible of his own mind, felt a hollow ache. He turned, drawn by an even more profound gravitational force. Back in the core cavern, the obsidian tetrahedron pulsed, no longer with a challenging, invasive rhythm, but an inviting, complex light. It was a beacon, a siren song of ultimate knowledge, radiating a silent, undeniable pull. Aris felt it in his very bones, a promise of understanding so vast, so complete, that it dwarfed any human ambition. Here lay the release from Danuk of regret, not just through confrontation, but through an existential dissolution into a higher state of being. This path was beyond human comprehension, a transcendence that whispered of cosmic patterns and universal truths. Fear coiled in his gut, the primal dread of the unknown, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming allure, a profound curiosity that had driven him his entire life. Safety, or the ultimate unknown? The choice hung heavy, an existential precipice. His gaze fell to his hands, calloused and worn, the faint tremors of adrenaline still present. He remembered the simple joy of a shared meal with a colleague, the tactile reality of rock samples in his grip, the scent of recycled air in a human habitat. These were the anchors of his humanity, the flawed, beautiful mess of a life lived within comprehensible boundaries. The normal, door shimmered, beckoning with the ghost of a future he had once craved. A rehabilitated career, a return to academic respectability, but it also hinted at a loss, a closing off of the profound expansion of consciousness he had just experienced. To step through it would be to put the genie back in the bottle, to willingly dim the light of a nascent understanding. He was no longer the man who had entered this rig. Was he still human enough to choose a human path? Aris took a breath, a long, slow intake of the warm, mineral-scented air. He did not step towards the shimmering portal, the mundane exit, nor did he abandon himself entirely to the tetrahedron's overwhelming embrace. Instead, with a quiet, resolute purpose, he approached the geometric object. His worn hand, the one that had brushed against alien artifacts and traced equations on countless data slates, reached out. His fingertips pressed gently against its perfectly smooth obsidian surface. A subtle energy exchange, cool and vast, flowed into him, not consuming but integrating. His eyes widened, not in terror, but in profound, quiet wonder. A faint inner light seemed to emanate from his form, a subtle shift in his very essence. "I will understand," he whispered, the words not a plea, but a statement of intent, a vow to bridge the chasm between human and cosmic. As his hand connected, the maze, The phantom corridors and echoes of regret dissolved completely. The core cavern solidified around him, no longer an oppressive space, but a serene chamber of raw, ancient rock. He saw the rig, its complex systems now a luminous web of energy and data, flowing with an elegant, discernible logic. Beyond that, the colossal mass of XYLOS-7, the eyeball planet, revealed its intricate geological heartbeat, its tidally locked dance with its star. And further still, the galaxy, once a distant tapestry of light, now pulsed with an underlying geometric order, a calm understanding of its vast, interconnected patterns. Aris Thorne was irrevocably changed. The weight of his past failures was gone, replaced by an expanded awareness, a profound clarity. He stood, serene and enlightened, a quiet triumph etched on a face that now carried the wisdom of the cosmos. The chasm diver rig, once a symphony of brute force and grinding metal, now hummed with a subtle, almost organic resonance. Dr. Aris Thorne moved through its vast, intricate pathways, his steps measured, his presence an almost imperceptible ripple in its operational flow. He didn't touch the holographic controls that once demanded his frantic attention. Instead, a thought, a focused intent, was enough. A distant mining drone, its multi-jointed arm poised to bore into a rich vein, adjusted its trajectory by a fraction of a degree, then accelerated with a newfound, silent purpose. Energy conduits, normally pulsing with inefficient surges, settled into optimized flowing currents, their light a steady, reassuring glow. This entire construct, Aris mused, a sense of profound belonging settling over him. Pefit's is an extension, a single, unified consciousness, guided by a heart of living geometry. He felt the planet's deep tremors, the rig's structural integrity, the flow of raw minerals, all as if they were part of his own extended nervous system. Back in his lab, now meticulously organized and imbued with the tetrahedron's faint, omnipresent energy, Aris intercepted the distant signal. A corporate survey ship, the Prospector, was approaching XYLOS-7. Its communications were standard, almost painfully mundane, yet an undercurrent of avarice was palpable. He saw their trajectory, their sensor sweeps, their initial, crude analysis of the rig's unusually stable yet anomalous energy signature. They were drawn by the power, the potential for exploitation, entirely unaware of the profound transformation that had occurred within. They won't understand, Aris thought, a weariness settling into his newly expanded awareness. They will see a resource, a prize, not a crucible, not a guardian. The holographic star chart before him shimmered with the approaching vessel's icon, a stark reminder of the human element, so predictable in its ambition. He knew he had to prepare, not for battle, but for an impossible conversation. Standing before the main communications array, a complex web of phased emitters and resonant dishes, Aris began to craft his message. It would be unlike any human transmission. Not words, for words were too crude, too easily misinterpreted. Instead, he channeled the artifact's influence, weaving together a series of exquisite geometric patterns, each line and angle imbued with specific meaning. These he overlaid with resonant frequencies, a symphony of mathematical precision designed to convey the tetrahedron's presence, its non-threatening nature, and the sheer incomprehensibility of its purpose. It was a warning, a plea, a profound statement of, "Do not disturb," all encoded in a language beyond human linguistics. How do you explain the ineffable? He pondered, his brow furrowed with the immense weight of responsibility. How do you warn those who only perceive threat or opportunity? The array pulsed, a kaleidoscope of alien light, broadcasting his silent, complex truth into the void. The response was immediate and utterly predictable. The Prospector's comms burst forth with standard hailing frequencies, layered with increasingly aggressive tones. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Rostova of the Prospector. Identify yourselves, you are trespassing in corporate space. Their sensors, unable to process Aris's complex patterns, flagged them as system interference, or, worse, a hostile jamming attempt. Angry red warnings flashed across Aris's internal displays, mirroring the ship's escalating alarm. He felt a profound sigh resonate through his expanded consciousness, a cosmic weariness at the gulf of understanding. They see only what they expect to see. Asterisk, he thought. Some is a challenge to their authority, a resource to be seized, not a revelation to be honored. The aggressive hails continued, demanding, threatening, entirely missing the subtle, profound warning he had woven into the fabric of space itself. From the observation deck, Aris watched the prospector approach the chasm diver's primary docking bay. It was a sleek, functional vessel, devoid of the rig's brutalist charm. He could feel the anticipation from its crew, a mixture of corporate mandate and scientific curiosity, utterly blind to the reality they were about to confront. He knew they would demand answers, demand access to the core, demand the Framily anomaly, man from Srari di Cora. Wan Sai must interact with them, asterisk, he realized, the thought a strange weight in his new mind. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the deck plating. The gauntness was gone, replaced by a subtle, unsettling clarity in his eyes, a faint internal luminescence that pulsed with the rhythm of the tetrahedron. He was still Aris Thorne, but irrevocably changed. A threshold had been crossed, not just for him, but for humanity, and he was now the solitary bridge. The docking bay of the Asterix Chasm diver was a sterile, impersonal expanse of reinforced durasteel and flickering indicator lights, designed for utility, not welcome. Dr. Aris Thorne stood at its threshold, the soft, rhythmic hum of the core artifact, a quiet pulse within his expanded awareness. He watched the airlock cycle, his gaze calm, almost unnervingly so. When the hatch hissed open, revealing a trio of figures in standard corporate survey suits, his eyes settled on the lead, a woman whose face was etched with the years he remembered. Captain Eva Rostova. Her sharp, analytical gaze, once dismissive of his theories, now widened in overt shock. "Thorne? Aris? Is that truly you?" Her voice, though professional, carried an unmistakable tremor of disbelief. His own features, subtly refined by the artifact's influence, were still recognizably his. But the gaunt desperation was gone, replaced by an unsettling serenity. His skin seemed to hold a faint inner luminescence, his eyes impossibly deep. "Captain Rostova," Aris replied, his voice a low, resonant tone that felt both familiar and profoundly alien. "It has been a long time." His words were calm, measured, devoid of the defensiveness she remembered. It was this quiet patience, more than any physical change, that unsettled her most. In the Asterisk Chasm diver's main control room, the air thrummed with the latent energy of the tetrahedron, a presence Aris felt as intimately as his own heartbeat. The holographic displays, usually a chaotic swirl of data, now presented information with an elegant, almost artistic clarity, reflecting his integrated consciousness. Captain Rostova, however, saw only a derelict rig and a man who had clearly lost his mind. "A consciousness catalyst?" Rostova scoffed, running a hand through her close-cropped hair. Her skepticism was a familiar shield. "Aris, I understand you've been alone for a long time, but this rig is transmitting impossible energy signatures. My sensors indicate a massive anomaly in the core. I need access now. Your delusions are not going to obstruct a corporate mandate." She gestured impatiently at the unseen, impossible data Aris was perceiving. He simply looked at her, a profound pity in his gaze that only fueled her irritation. He knew she couldn't comprehend. His words, though scientifically precise, were to her merely the ravings of a man, unhinged by solitude and ambition. Rostova's insistence on core access was a grating intrusion into the delicate balance Aris had achieved with the artifact. He saw the corporate greed, the scientific arrogance, a mirror of his own past self. The tetrahedron, sensing the threat, pulsed gently within his mind. He didn't choose to act, but rather allowed the influence to ripple outwards. As Rostova took a step towards the core access panel, a sudden, disorienting temporal ripple washed through the control room. The very air seemed to thicken, then thin, objects subtly shifting in his peripheral vision. Rostova gasped, clutching her head as a wave of intense vertigo slammed into her. The sterile room briefly shimmered, the metallic surfaces distorting as if seen through heated air. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with her scientific training. What was that?" she stammered, her voice hoarse. Aris simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable, a quiet warning in his eyes. Back on the bridge of Asterisk the Prospector, Captain Rostova, though still shaken by the inexplicable disorientation, was resolute. The corporate mandate was clear, unyielding. "Lieutenant Jax," she barked, her voice tight. "Get me corporate liaison Sector Lieb Marek." The holographic corporate logo of Ethereum Mining Conglomerate flared to life, Marek's stern face appearing. He listened to Rostova's report, his gaze unwavering. "Captain, we're not interested in Thorne's ramblings. The energy readings from that anomaly are off the charts. It's a gold mine, potentially. Secure the rig, secure the asset. If Thorne resists, consider him a rogue operative. Use force if necessary. We want that core." Rostova's jaw tightened. She knew Aris was changed, but she still saw him as a man, not a threat. Yet, the orders were absolute. A sense of impending doom settled over her, thick and cold. In the core cavern, Aris stood before the pulsating tetrahedron, its obsidian surface reflecting the faint inner light of his own transformed being. He felt the prospector decision, a cold, calculated intent to breach his sanctuary. He understood. They saw only resource, not transcendence. They would not be allowed to defile this place. This was no longer just his discovery, it was a sacred trust. He closed his eyes, focusing not on violence, but on the intricate geometric patterns of space-time that the artifact had taught him. The tetrahedron pulsed intensely, mirroring his resolve. Asterisk. Not a prison, Asterisk, he thought, but a protective barrier. A test for those who would enter. The rig structure around them began to subtly blur, its rigid lines dissolving into the fluid geometry of his will. The maze was about to awaken, not as a torment, but as a guardian. The prospector's boarding party, led by the grim-faced Lieutenant Jax, breached the airlock with a hiss of compressed atmosphere and the dull thud of boots on sterile metal. Their comms crackled with static, a minor annoyance. Then, the corridors began to shift, not physically, not at first, but perceptually. A long, straight passage seemed to curve inward, its termination point doubling back on itself. Jax barked an order, his voice tight, as his security team faltered. "Keep moving! It's a psychological trick." But the trick deepened. The metallic floor beneath them rippled, a visual distortion that made their stomachs churn. A wall shimmered, then became a ceiling, forcing one of the Marines to shriek as he instinctively clawed at the inverted surface. Gravity itself seemed to stutter, momentarily pulling them sideways, then down again. Their tactical displays went wild, displaying impossible vectors and non-existent structural breaches. "What in the void is this?" Jax screamed, his voice dissolving into panic as the sterile, predictable architecture of the chasm diver rig dissolved around them, replaced by an impossible, Escher-like nightmare of shifting angles and impossible returns. Emergency lights flashed, painting the chaos in frantic red. In the core cavern, Aris Thorne stood before the pulsating tetrahedron, its obsidian surface reflecting the frantic, disoriented chaos he perceived through the rig's systems. He felt no malice, only a profound, ancient imperative. This was not a weapon to destroy, but a crucible to transform. He extended his awareness, not to inflict pain, but to imprint understanding. A wave of pure, geometric data surged through the rig, directly into the minds of the struggling boarding party. It was not a physical assault, but a cascade of raw information, an overwhelming vision. They saw, not with their eyes, but with their core being, a cosmic dance of creation and destruction. Universes bloomed and withered. Stars were woven from pure light, and galaxies spiraled into oblivion, all connected by an intricate, pulsing web of geometric patterns. They witnessed the birth of space-time and its inevitable collapse, the fundamental, elegant mathematics of existence. It was a glimpse behind the veil of reality, a truth so vast it shattered their perception of self, of purpose, of everything they had ever known. Awe and terror intertwined, leaving them paralyzed, their minds scrambling to process the incomprehensible. Aboard, the prospector, Captain Eva Rostova watched the feed from Jax's helmet camera cut out, replaced by a flat, high-pitched whine. Then, the comms returned, filled with the ragged breathing of her surviving security detail. Moments later, Lieutenant Jax himself stumbled into the bridge, his eyes wide and vacant, a thin stream of drool escaping his lips. He clawed at the air, muttering, "Patterns, so many patterns, it's all big patterns." Rostova stared at him, a chill seeping into her bones. She felt a faint echo, a residual psychic thrum of what Jax had experienced, a vastness that dwarfed her very soul. This was not a rogue archaeologist. This was something else entirely. Her corporate mandate, her ambition, all seemed utterly insignificant in the face of such profound alien truth. "Full retreat," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Disengage immediately. Get us out of here. Respect the unknown." Her pale face was a mask of shock and a nascent, terrifying reverence. The ship's engines flared, eager to escape the impossible gravity of XYLOS-7. In the core cavern, Aris Thorne stood. His form was subtly altered, his skin now holding a faint inner luminescence that pulsed in sync with the tetrahedron. He was taller, perhaps, or simply more present. His eyes, no longer just human, saw the intricate dance of energy and matter that comprised the rig, the planet, the distant stars. He was no longer Dr. Aris Thorne, the disgraced xeno-archaeologist. He was a conduit, an interpreter, an interface. He had chosen not to merge completely, but to become a bridge between the mundane reality of humanity and the profound, geometric truths of the cosmos. A sense of timelessness settled upon him, a quiet power that transcended ambition and regret. He was the guardian of a truth too vast for human minds, yet now, intrinsically linked to one. The prospector jumped to FTL, a streak of light vanishing into the void. Behind it, XYLOS-7, the eyeball planet, seemed to watch. Its terminator line, the perpetual twilight zone between scorching day and frozen night, pulsed faintly. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum, a heartbeat emanating from its deep core. But it was there, a new, sentient presence now residing within the planet, a silent observer of the galaxy. Humanity had come seeking minerals, and found something else entirely. The universe, they would soon discover, had just become a much, much larger and more mysterious place. What will humanity do next?